There was a festival of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, there is a pool called in Hebrew Bethzatha, which has 5 porticos. In these lay many invalids, blind, lame, and the paralyzed. One man was there who had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take your mat, and walk." At once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and began to walk. Now that day was a Sabbath, so the Jews said to the man who had been cured, "It is the Sabbath, it is not lawful for you to carry your mat." But he answered them, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Take up your mat and walk.'" They asked him, "Who is the man who said to you, 'Take it up and walk'?" Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had disappeared in the crowd that was there. Later, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you've been made well. Do not sin anymore so that nothing worse happens to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. Therefore the Jews started persecuting Jesus because he was doing such things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is still working, and I also am working." For this reason the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because he was not only breaking the Sabbath, but was also calling God his own Father, therefore making himself equal to God. The Gospel of the Lord. Please have a seat. Well, of the 4 Gospels, it's safe to say that John is the Gospel of stark contrasts. Read any part of John you want, and you're going to run into examples of these stark contrasts, these kind of polar opposites that are written all through John's Gospel. Like things above versus things below. John is always talking about up and down. You might remember the story of Jesus and Nicodemus meeting at nighttime. And what does Jesus finally say to Nicodemus? He says, "If I tell you about earthly things and you do not understand, how will you understand heavenly things?" So there's a difference, earthly things, heavenly things, things above, things below. That's just one example of these polar opposites. Then, of course, what's another one? Life and death. And the story of the raising of Lazarus is probably the best examples of that. One moment, everybody's weeping and mourning, Lazarus is dead. The next moment, Jesus shows up, walks to the tomb, and bang, he's alive again. Life and death. What's interesting is John is the only gospel who mentions either Nicodemus or Lazarus. Matthew, Mark, and Luke have nothing to say about them. John, on the other hand, has a lot to say about those fellows and the stark contrast that they represent. There are other, big examples as well, things like sight and blindness, or belief versus unbelief. With Jesus, you're either with him or against him. There's no middle ground. And the stark contrast we meet in this part of the gospel is between clinging desperately to the past or leaning hopefully into the future. It's this contrast, the stark contrast, that sets up the gospel's drama. And who doesn't like a little drama every once in a while, especially if it's somebody else's, right? So John gives us a good dose of drama in the story we're reading today. It centers around a fellow who has 2 problems. Problem number 1 is he's been sick with something pretty serious for 38 years. There's John's fondness of drama again. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we're introduced to women you might remember, flow of blood for 12 years, another unnamed illness for 18 years. John gives us 38 years. That's the example he wants to put in front of us to contrast, Pharisees, Jesus, earthly power, heavenly power. You get the picture. So we're not told what this guy is suffering from, but obviously it involves mobility. And being sick for 38 years, he's already a pretty old guy. So whatever it is, he's been sick almost for 4 decades. It can't be anything good. And that would be enough, right? Being sick for 38 years. But no, his second problem is whatever he's suffering from is such that he's unable to get into this healing pool after the water is disturbed. A local legend said that every once in a while an angel would go into the water, disturb the water, imbue that water with healing power, and the first guy in got all the benefit of that healing power. It was like, winner take all. And so there he's been for 38 years, unable to move, probably slower and slower and slower each intervening year, no healing. A lot of waiting, a lot of hoping, but no healing. So whatever you believe about this healing scheme, our guy does believe it, and he's not the only one. There are porticos around this pool full of people who are suffering various ailments. I did the math. He's been struggling to get into the pool for over 38 years. That's just a tick under 14,000 attempts to be the first one in the pool. I mean, say what you will about the guy, he's got persistence. And of course, the idea that water has special healing properties, we might think that's quaint, but isn't it true that we still believe that to a certain extent today? How many spas are built over mineral springs purporting to offer all kinds of healing benefits? Our president during the war, FDR, was a great proponent of the healing properties of mineral springs. In fact, he died in Warm Springs, Georgia, while what they called taking the cure in the mineral-rich springs he had visited every year but one since 1924. So in ancient times as well as in modern times, there's something about water and getting well. There's a connection there. And the guy in our story is so wedded to this idea that his only hope for healing is in that water somehow. He doesn't really even hear Jesus' offer to heal him. Jesus asks, "Do you want to be made well?" Of course he does, but he believes his only chance is to get into the water, and so that's what he asks of Jesus. Help me get into the water. The first one, so I get the healing I've been waiting for so long. This makes him a prime example, I think, of John describing somebody who's clinging desperately to the past. He can only understand healing in terms of a scheme that's failed him for 38 years. I mean, try to imagine that. Almost 14,000 times he's seen people come and go, come sick, leave healed. They get into the water and they get out of the water, and their lives go on. And there he is 38 years every single day. So he's stuck in the mire and muck of years of failure. He's completely frustrated by his inability to make any headway toward recovery. Exactly nothing is going his way. Then Jesus shows up, and out of nowhere, he asks him if he wants to get better. And you know what happens next. Jesus tells him to get on his feet, grab his stuff, and get on his way into a new life, a healed life, which he does. Without a single word. He makes no great show of faith. He speaks not one word of gratitude. He just gets up, picks up, and gets going. So as healing stories go, this is a weird one. And then it gets weirder. So the healed guy gets healed without any show of understanding what's happened to him, right? And then he gets pulled over by the religion police for, carrying his stuff on the Sabbath. He tells them he's doing it at the behest of the fellow who's healed him. And they try to find out who would have the temerity, to heal on the Sabbath. He doesn't know. So they go on their way, this guy goes on his way, and sometime later, he bumps into Jesus again. And they have a short exchange, whereupon this healed guy, this time, knows who healed him, and what does he do? He goes right to the religion police and rats Jesus out. And they find him and start giving him the business of healing on the Sabbath. So it does look like this is a good example of no good deed goes unpunished. The more Jesus gives of himself, the more he gets hassled for it. Not only does he not get any kind of thanks, but he gets sideways with the religious authorities, as he is wont to do. The more he invites people to lean into this hopeful future that God is offering through him, what we call the kingdom of God, the more he offers that, the more people seem to be wedded to a broken past. So what's the point? Well, it is a successful healing story. I mean, the guy gets healed, but it isn't very satisfying. It's filled with people who aren't very nice, people who run the spectrum from ungrateful to suspicious to openly hostile. So why does John even bother telling us about it? Well, to get to that answer, let's ask another why question first. Of all the people Jesus could have picked to heal, why this guy? Jesus knows things about people, right? He knows what motivates them. He knows how they operate. He knows how they'll react. So why this guy? Have you noticed that in a lot of other miracle stories, there's a very strong reaction to what Jesus does, especially when it involves a healing? People tend to fall down at Jesus' feet. They pray to God. They praise God. They have all kinds of dramatic responses. Sometimes they follow him, become his disciples. But this story is much, much different, right? In fact, there's very little about this particular healing story to suggest the healed guy is ever fully aware of what's happened to him, and maybe that's the point. The drama of this story is that there's no drama. There's nothing in the story that demands our attention. So maybe our attention is supposed to be focused somewhere else. Remember, for John, miracles reveal the character of God. So with miracle stories in John, the focus is almost never pointed at the person who's the recipient of the miracle. The focus is almost always pointed in the direction of God, which is a good thing, since a lot of people like to make receiving miracles more about them than about God. Ever hear somebody say, if enough people pray or have sufficient faith or believe strongly enough, that God will act in a certain way? It's almost like, if we can show God we're counting on him enough, he'll give us what we want. This God isn't like that. Some people say if you live a certain way, God will treat you a certain way. This God isn't like that. I really do believe some people think by being good, they can somehow extract from God a benefit God wouldn't otherwise have given them. This God is not that way. He's nothing like that. The God we meet in this story, in Jesus, takes no notice of faith or piety or adherence to the law. He doesn't index his grace to the amount of praise or thanks or worship he expects to get in return. He certainly doesn't choose to heal on the basis of the glory the healed person will bring to God. So why does this guy get healed? Very simply, he gets healed because it is the good pleasure of God to heal and to show mercy and to have compassion. Sure, Jesus in his ministry does bump into a lot of people who are thrilled that he healed them or healed their child or their somebody else. And they respond with praise and worship and loyalty. And we read these stories and we're invited to imagine what it must have been like to experience Jesus that way. And that's great. If our faith is strengthened, if we're encouraged, that's wonderful. Nothing wrong with that. But this healing is not about that. This healing delivers, I think, a more astounding message. And here it is. Jesus' attention and compassion and healing power are not reserved for the deserving or for those who will respond with an appropriate expression of appreciation. If that were the case, then every miracle would be a reward instead of a gift, wouldn't it? If Jesus was healing people he knew would have a strong reaction to his unleashing of power, then miracles would all be a reward and not a gift. And we know that miracles are a gift. The truth is, everything we get from God is a gift. Is it not? Every moment of every day, every breath, all gifts from God. Why? Because nothing we get from God can be deserved or can be rightly expected. And though we could hope for a more responsive recipient of God's grace here in the story than the guy who gets the miracle, we couldn't possibly hope for a deeper truth. God is who he is and does what he does completely apart from who we are and what we do. It's called grace. All of it. Every moment is all about grace. Which is not to say that our role as Jesus followers is merely to wait passively for the next round of goodies God deigns to toss our way. No, we're not called to inertia because of this gift nature of God. No. Notice the second encounter Jesus has with the healed guy. He says to him, "See, you've been made well. Do not sin anymore so that nothing worse happens to you." What does that mean? What is Jesus saying? Is he saying that if the healed guy doesn't watch his step, he'll wind back by the pool, riddled by, a paralyzing disease? Well, it can't be that, because we know Jesus repudiates the idea that God blesses you if you obey him and he curses you if you don't. We just got past that. That can't be part of the solution. So what does Jesus mean? I think Jesus is talking about the sin of unbelief. This guy was touched by divine power and shrugged it off. His body was healed, but his spirit was untouched, left cold, unchanged, indifferent to the life and the hope that Jesus was offering him. And that's that drama again, whether to cling desperately to the past or to move hopefully into God's future. The healed guy in this story opted for the past. So even though he was miraculously healed, nothing else for him changed. Everything we get from God is a gift, but a gift unrecognized can neither change us nor be shared with anyone else. Right? And this is the story of the guy at the pool. He receives God's gift, but he doesn't recognize the giver. And by doing that, he effectively puts an end to God's power. Does he get God's power? Yes. Does he get healed? Yes. Does he get sick again because of his ingratitude? No. He still gets healed. He never has to, sit and wait by that pool ever again. But neither can he pass on the gift to another person. He has no story to tell. He has no encouragement to offer anyone else because he's looking backwards, not forwards. So, no inspiration to share his story with others. He goes about his business as if nothing happened. And in, the meantime, he fingers Jesus as the guy who broke the Sabbath so he doesn't get in trouble. The message is, don't do what he did. Please. Do the opposite of what he did. Recognize all of God's gifts. Allow them to shape you and to change you, to encourage you to see and work for and move into God's hopeful future. And while you're at it, share God's gift with others. Now, you can't put your hands on somebody and heal them miraculously. Most of us can't, right? So that's not what I mean by passing on the gift. No, but you can give without prejudice. You can resist ingratitude's wanting to lessen or limit your generosity. You can be astounding in how you love and live and serve for God. You can. So I think one of the lessons of this miracle is be astounding. Be like Jesus in your capacity to give of yourself with no thought of what the return might be. The world needs desperately to be astounded by good things and good people a lot more than it is. You are all good things. You are all God's good things. You are all His sons and daughters. Are you not? How many people do you know right now who are bewildered by the present or clinging to a past that's gone for good? These people need you. How many people do you know who are in some place in life where they can't see a moment into a better future, let alone the rest of their lives? These people desperately need you because you know something that they really need. You know what it feels like to be touched by the grace of God. And that's the story we have to tell. That's the good news we have to share. And we can render this good news in the way we love people, and the way we listen to people, and the way we offer forgiveness, the way we encourage people, the way we let people approach us, the way we approach other people. If every day is a gift, then is not every moment of our lives touched by God's grace? Of course it is. We who know God, we who follow Jesus, get that. So the world needs people who know God, who follow Jesus, and know what being a follower of Jesus has empowered them for. And what you've been empowered for is to be astounding for Jesus, to tell the story of the power and the love and the mercy and the forgiveness that you have received, so that that story can be passed on to somebody who desperately needs to hear it. We think, that all the Christians are over here and all, the pagans are over there, and all the Christians have it all together and all the pagans, like if we're going to share the love of God, it has to be to somebody who doesn't even know how to spell Jesus. No. There are lots of people within the church who are in tough places. We don't have to go far to remind people of God's power, God's love for them, God's desire that their lives and His life find one another, intertwine. So be astounding for God. Love generously, serve selflessly, and help the next guy take hold of the hopeful future that God's got waiting for them.